Are all classical cadenzas improvised?
Say what?
Are all classical cadenzas improvised?
Well, yeah, I mean, then you can go back to like Frederic Chevsky, you know, I don't like that, you know, just, you know, I don't want to dwell on the dark side, but we could, you know, you can go to Frederic Chevsky, and yeah, I mean, yes, there was an improvised tradition in the Western European classical tradition that got lost. But basically, you know, from early on, most classical music was improvised. Whether it was Baroque music and the figure bass,
right.
The cadenzas were all improvised. You know, in Beethoven's time, those, you know, piano concertos and things like that. And a lot of the cadenzas were improvised. It was only later that, you know, these things got kind of the cadenzas got originality, things like that. You know, and then there are artists now like Frederic Chevsky, when they do a Beethoven piano concerto, they'll improvise the cadenzas. There are musicians who can look at a figured bass and make up the music and
right.
go along and make up their own ornament. I mean, and it's getting more and more. I mean, Baroque musicians interpreting modern music, for example, these days, and the way Baroque musicians looking at, you know, even at a violin sonata, the way the violin sonata would be played. I think that
this four cello thing that I'm doing is with two viola da gamba players and two cellists, and that's exactly what we do. We play early music and we play contemporary music, you know. There really does seem to be a connection there somehow.
But I think we lost it, and then it's coming back. Frederic Chevsky. You can't tell when he's playing his music, when he's improvising, and when he's reading the notes on the paper. It's like all blurred together. You know, recently he played, you know, whether it's the People United or Four Pieces for Piano. Unless you really, you know, the audience doesn't know when he's improvising or when Emerson is improvising and when they're not. So you know, they're kind of going in between them. And so Frederick's one of these guys that's like that. And I even, you know, worked with Frederick on these variations and the new variations. And everybody was sort of improvising. You know, and when anybody had a solo, whether it was the pianist or the percussionist, everybody seemed to be just working with the material that they just played. You know what I mean? Harmonically. And then Frederick just stopped and said, well, you know, actually, it can be a total departure. You don't have to, you know, do this. You know, it can go somewhere, you know, the improvisation should be go somewhere else maybe. You know, take it somewhere, you know. So I think it's just like, as I say, for me, and the way I got into it, you know, into classical music was because I heard, for me, it was like I was hearing the same thing. I was hearing it all as one thing, whether it was notated or whether it was improvised. And again, as performers, you know, I think you know, people, certain, you know, composers like to write for us or write for, you know, is because they see, like, you know, how we kind of, you know, something more than just playing the notes. There's something beyond just looking at the notes on the paper and playing everything in its right place and its right pitch. There's something beyond that, you know, that a performer brings, right? And it's something, I mean, the notes just, you can't say it all just in the notes. Yes.
I have a question I've been thinking about for a while, because I saw a percussion ensemble recently playing on jumps, and they were playing notated music, and I thought about you because, you know, for each composition you play a different kit, a different set. And so just for a mechanical, this is a kind of question about mechanics, when you're playing notated music, but you're playing a completely different set of stuff, isn't that really hard to kind of translate what's on the page to this particular setup? Like I saw you do listen to the Zorn thing where it's this particular setup, and I saw you do the Zanakas years and years ago, and, you know, it was a completely weird setup. And isn't it really...
It's different because, you know, a piano player always, you know, whenever he or she goes to a gig, I mean, the notes are always in the same place, and the keys are always the same size. And, you know, you always kind of know what the it's always the same.
Right.
Pretty much on a cello, you know, you know where, you know that string is going to be that note if you play it as an open string, and you know if you cut it in half, it'll be, you know, whatever. And hopefully, you know, basically it's always the same. You know, you're always either dealing with the same matrix or whatever it is. Not, you know, yes, with a multiple percussion. The setup is always different. You always have to, whenever you come to a new piece, you have to come up with a whole new setup and learn a whole new geography of how things, you know, how to set that particular piece up. So yeah, it's always coming to a different, when you're learning a multiple percussion piece, 9 times out of 10, you're kind of coming up with a new array, a way of arranging those instruments and then trying to figure out how to do it. That's why I prefer, pieces like for flower pots or for a solo triangle or a solo gong and things like that.
But I think what I'm asking, like, is there a correspondence in terms of, the field in front of you to the staff and?
It's always different.
It's always
Every time you look at a piece like whether it's Zeitlus by Stockhausen or Safa by Xenakis or Green by John Zorn, it's always a different array of instruments on that are set up differently. That note on one piece that might be on the F line of the treble clef might correspond to a completely different instrument in a completely different geography. So it's always going to be a little different. Obviously, the more you do multiple percussion, you might get used to always like putting the vibraphone in front of the marimba or something as simple as that.
On the piece you did with Joan Road on 24th Street,